the way that I've found the most success is by injecting ideas that they're passionate about. And so it can be difficult because if you got a team of 50 different people, it's going to be tough to find the one thing that's going to ignite everybody and bring them together. The first thing I would say that differentiates companies, in my mind, are whether they're empowering their technologists to develop new ideas, or whether they're stagnant and stuck in their ways.
Welcome back to the Change Agent Podcast. My name is Nathan Lesnowski. I'm your host today. We are so glad that we have a great guest this week. We have done so many interesting things on this show. We've talked about the transformation of manufacturing. We've talked about how people are engaging in changing the way they think about tech and data. We're talking about machine learning. We've talked about ideas around bringing products to market. And today is going to be no different. On the Change Agent Podcast, we're talking about people who are transforming the customers, markets, clients, people that they're engaging in. And we have a super special guest, is a great colleague of mine, Brian Haydin. Brian is a solutions architect at Concurrency. He has been engaged in over 50 different customers over the course of his career. And we're going to talk a little bit about consultant stories today. Things that you may want to know that your consultants know about you and can provide you with some great advice as to how to avoid maybe missteps, things that we've seen, things that companies can do better if only we could have the opportunity to tell them. And today we do. So welcome to the show, Brian.
Thanks, Nate. Thanks for stealing my thunder. I had a whole story planned here about how I was going to lead into the 50 customers.
Okay, well, tell us a little bit more about you. What is that? Who is Brian Haydin?
Sure. So a theme that you're probably going to hear today is that I have a lot of intellectual curiosity. So even when I was trying to figure out what I wanted to do in college, I started out as a chemistry major, didn't really like it. I had a great teacher in high school, but once I got to the college, I was like, this is kind of boring. Switched my major again to physics, didn't really like that. And, after a year, I was like, well, what about this math stuff? So I actually pursued math as my major. And then right before I got done with my math degree, I took a computer Fortran course and was like, this is way cooler. I'm going to do this. So quit that program and went into the engineering program. And that's how I got into comp sci and programming in general. So as I started to develop my career, first thing you do is you get an internship, you go work for some industry companies. And, I had this 1 to 2 year kind of rotation before I'd get bored at a company and kind of move on. You sort of do the things that they hired you to do and, you look for something new. And I got challenged during one of my interviews with another industry company. And she asked me point blank, looks like you only stay at a company for 2 years at a time. What assurances are you going to give me that you're going to stay here for more than 2? And I told her I can't, So my next job, didn't land that one, was working for a consulting company. And I found out that, there I could really work with, as many companies as I wanted without having to switch jobs. So at the end of the day, I wound up, at current count, that's well over 50, companies that I've worked with.
Wow, that's really cool. So when you think about what that's meant as a way of engaging companies, what's special about being a consultant? What are the things that when you walk in the door and you're a consultant, what's different about being a consultant than being a sort of normal employee at that company?
Yeah, so I've got a really good story that kind of illustrates that. It was working for a bank here in Milwaukee, and I sat through, they were doing a core migration, so moving from, one banking core system to another. It's huge project, 2 years. And there were elements of the project that just weren't going well. And, you'd have the BA sitting in the room, and we actually had this round table every week. We'd go through what's the project status on this one. And she had described a situation where, there was no momentum on what it was that she was working on. They weren't getting anywhere. But she had, stoplight colors, red, yellow, green. And she's like, it's green, And so the CIO turned to me and he said, Brian, you're a consultant. You've been through this a few times. What do you think? And I'm like, well, it's red, And I mean, you could just hear a pin drop in that room at that point because it was just the realization that, we're not making momentum. We're not actually changing the needle on this right now. And, an outsider being able to come in and articulate that, bluntly, if you want to think of it that way, is just kind of a refreshing pace for some of these companies.
What do you think stops people internal to the company from doing that same thing? I mean, like for us coming in as consultants, it's sort of natural, right? You feel like a certain amount of ability to transcend the politics and the situation of the company and just tell it like it is. What stops someone who's internal to the company from doing the exact same thing that you're proposing to do?
Well, as a consultant, I'm not stuck there to deal with the political ramifications
bingo,
of,
right?
So, success or failure, I'm somebody that can come in, and if I fail, I'm gone. I'm not providing value to the organization. People that are at an organization are more invested. They've been there for 5, 10, 15 years, 20 years, in a lot of cases. And so they have a lot invested in it, and they don't want to be looked at from their peers as having failed at doing something they were hired, that was their assignment or their job. So I have the ability to just be transparent and honest that they probably don't have without having some ramifications, and that's a big difference.
What do you think the leaders at a company like that, if I'm a leader listening to you say this and being like, man, like I'm either A, I need a consultant to come in and tell me what's really going on, or B, I could maybe encourage my team to have the trust or intellectual openness to be able to have these conversations. Like, how do I pivot my organization to have that kind of thing that doesn't make them be fearful of ramifications or impact?
We used the precise word, which is trust, right? So does the company have my back if I'm not successful at this project? And in order to foster that, you have to build a culture around that. And, this specific instance that I used, there was definitely a lack of trust. And so that would be, something that I would key in on that. How you do that, I mean, there's many different ways, organizationally, teamwork-wise, and, just being able to educate them and train them and, so that they understand that they're not going to lose their job or lose face if something goes off the rails. But that's an institutional issue, a culture issue.
Yeah, I think everyone can remember how their boss or someone they reported up to treated them when something went wrong.
Yeah.
When something failed, right? And that kind of sticks with you. And sometimes it's a good experience or a bad experience, and maybe that wound even sometimes is carried with them that prevents them from doing that.
Yeah, you bring up a really good point that made me think of most times when consultants are brought into an organization, it's at a time of change. So I'm going to be migrating my tenant from, on-prem to Office 365. I'm going to be doing, some big thing, and I need some consultants to help augment that or some expertise to come in and do it. So, but, what also happens within an organization that has this dynamic play out as well is you get new leadership. And, in this particular case, I would actually point back to that as being, there was a ruffling of the feathers. There was a new leader in place. And so they didn't know if they could trust that individual or not.
Interesting. When you come into an organization fresh and you're in an opportunity to be able to help guide them down a journey, what are the kinds of things that you're scoping out? You're taking in a lot, right? You enter in, you're examining what's happening, you're taking in the culture, the perspectives, and so on. Like, what are the things that you're consciously or subconsciously looking for that help you to be able to navigate?
Well, okay, so helping me to navigate is, because there's two ways I'm going to answer this question. One is going to be on the personnel level, right? How I navigate the individuals. But then I also want to talk a little bit about technology as well, because as a consultant, I'm being brought in as an advisor as well on the technology that they're going to be implementing. So from a people perspective, I tend to take the attitude of, you've hired me to be a part of your team to help you do something great. And so when I walk in the door, I leave my Concurrency badge behind me, and I'm now a client employee. And so I look to build trust within the people that I'm working with, and just observe, what are the pain points that they're having? How can I coach these individuals to, be better at their jobs or look at things with a fresh perspective? So, and then on top of that, you build credibility by bringing expertise to the table, which in turn builds trust for them as a person within the organization. But the other aspect of that is the technology aspect of it. Like, how do I look at this ecosystem and what they're trying to accomplish and bring fresh ideas? So a good example of changing a company's technology culture, from within. I was working for a company that does infant and patient monitoring management, and they were in the process of redesigning their bands. Think of an infant being born, and they put the bands on their ankles, really. Mm-hmm. And they were having a really elongated engineering effort trying to get these bands and the doors to work correctly under the new technology they were implementing. So I had just gone to a tech talk, a couple of weeks, prior to this, and had recognized, some of the Internet of Things types of ways of being able to solve these problems. So eventually I went to the owner of the company and said, hey, I've seen these new widgets and gadgets out there. I think that this can provide some value to your organization if you start to look at it. And I got a lot of resistance from it. Like, no. We know how our engineering stuff works. So, they weren't getting any momentum. And after about 2 months, he came back to me and said, what would you do? Mm-hmm. I said, well, give me a month. Let me put together something for you and let's see where it goes. So I spent about a month engineering a new door system using essentially what's Raspberry Pi today, and was able to put together a demonstration. Like, look, took me a month. Did what you guys are struggling to do. It's been a year and a half. You guys haven't been able to get this to work, and they were impressed, right? They wound up not using my technology, which is fine. That happens. I'm not really worried about it. But what they did do is they took those ideas and moved forward with ways to incorporate new devices into their platform using like Raspberry Pi type of technology. So it did change them.
Yeah, you kind of opened them up to thinking about new ideas and innovating around the product they had in market already. Mm-hmm. And maybe it wasn't exactly the solution that was implemented, but it certainly got them moving down the road.
Yeah. So, again, to circle back on the culture aspect of it, it was, in my mind, changing the way that they think about technology and how it can actually solve problems for their business.
Interesting. How do you navigate the different sort of ponds of resistance that exist? Just coming in as a leader, whether this is, yourself coming in as a consultant, having to navigate that. You get a little bit of an automatic transcendence that you get because you are a consultant. But you also get these little ponds of resistance where maybe someone doesn't talk to you, or they avoid you, or they try to wall it off from the thing that you're thinking about. How do you navigate that and help them to become part of the solution versus maybe kind of sitting over on the sidelines?
Yeah, so really it's an engagement issue, right? So when you're dealing with people that have that I've found have been resistant to some of the changes that I'm trying to implement, I want to bring them in to be a part of the solution. More often than not, when they're resistant like that, it's because they don't feel like their ideas are being heard and they have something else they want to bring to the table. And I'm fine coaching them through that, even if it means that giving them an opportunity to be successful, or you prove your idea out. Let's work together on this one. Let's flush out the idea. And if it fails, give them, the feedback that that's okay. We tried this iteration. Let's go in a different direction. What do you suggest next? But more often than not, when people think that it's their ideas that are coming through, they're not going to be as resistant. So in a lot of ways, I try to make it I try to make it their ideas so that they're the owner of the solution.
Interesting. When you're trying to navigate the resistance and push around it or push through it or help them to be able to adopt new ideas, like, what do you do when that person is sort of just straight up stuck? Like you've tried I want to make it your idea, but they're just kind of arguing in complete conflict to where everyone else is going. What do you do in that situation?
Well, so let's assume that this isn't the CIO that's being, resistant this way, because
let's hope that would
because then my solution is not going to work, right? But at some point in time, I have to give tough love to the organization I'm working with, right? Mm-hmm. And having a difficult conversation with management executives in articulating what my concerns are would be the next step, mm-hmm. right? So let's work together as a management team to figure out how we can coach this individual past their fears and resistance, really.
Yeah, it might go back to a culture thing, right?
Yeah, and that's happened quite a bit. Having worked with 50 companies, one of the interesting pieces of feedback that I get often is, I hired you because you failed so many times, right?
Yeah.
I've got a lot of battle scars. I've made a lot of mistakes in my time. But that, I can relate to the situations that these companies are going through and develop a level of trust, with the executives at the company. And they're often asking me, what do you think of this individual? What do you think of that individual? How's this team running compared to other teams in the industry? And being able to give that feedback, transparently, to executives is something that they can't get from an internal employee that doesn't have the breadth of experience that a consultant might have.
So if you had to take your experience as a consultant across 50 some plus companies, and you had to throw all those companies' names up on a board and start to categorize them around things that are great about them and things that aren't so great about them, maybe even check boxes like they have really great offices. This one has great offices. This one doesn't have so great offices. This one has great lunch. This one doesn't have great lunch. This one has a great culture. This one doesn't have great culture. Like when you think about like the core things that make them innovative, attractive, interesting workplaces that are doing things that are really changing their mission and delivering on their mission, like how do you delineate between those companies as you look at them as a consultant?
Yeah, the first thing I would say that differentiates companies in my mind are whether they're empowering their technologists to develop new ideas, or whether they're stagnant and stuck in their ways. So the most successful companies have found a way to allow a certain amount of freedom within their pods, if you will, to come up with new ideas and experiment with those ideas and to fail with those ideas. I mean, at the end of the day, that's what consulting is about. We come in with fresh new ideas, and most of the time it works, because I've done it with 50 different companies or so. But sometimes it doesn't work, and you get egg on your face, and you have to go back to the drawing board and start over. So empowering the employees, I think, is one way that I would delineate between companies that are successful and not.
Interesting. Yeah, almost the sense that they think about their mission as the mission, but having a fluid nature of how it's delivered, and that it can continue to evolve over time. That like the way we deliver on our mission today might still be the mission, but we're going to be able to pivot on that and maybe add technology into the mix or change the way we interact with people, or maybe even pivot exactly who our customer is to add more value to them.
Absolutely. And, you bring up a good point in terms of, the customers. I mean, sometimes they're not even a good fit for us if they're not ready to take that step of faith with us. So, that's an important thing for us to recognize when we go to choose to work for a company, or whether we choose to engage with a client.
That's a really huge point. I mean, when we think about the difference in companies, there's a pretty clear perspective we have on whether or not they're a company that looks at vendors as big V vendor or big or little v vendor, or they are looking at their partners as someone that works with them to be able to innovate and drive solutions. And there's a big differentiation between those types of relationships. I mean, maybe you could expand on that.
Yeah, absolutely. So, we do get into situations where people aren't looking for a partner; they're just looking for people to take an order. And me in this position that I have at the organization is great because I get to qualify that. Mm-hmm. And if our prospective clients or even our existing clients aren't willing to push the boundaries on technology and innovation, they're probably not going to be a good fit for us in the long run. I talk to my team, a lot about, the difference between bringing innovative solutions and bring commoditized solutions to market. And we can do a really good job at commodity type of work. That's not that isn't going to be our value proposition to an organization. And so really it's how can we push the envelope for them?
Interesting. What will a company that you're talking with tell you that they won't tell their boss?
An existing company, or like an existing client,
or
any prospective client?
Any company. Like you're brought in as a consultant, any one of these 50 companies, right? What will they tell you that they won't tell your boss? I'll give you an example. Like I was talking with this is years ago, but I was talking with a company that I was interacting with this is the first call ever talking to them. And I had a bunch of their engineers and architects on this call, and they were actively throwing their CIO under the bus to a partner they've never even talked to before.
In front of the CIO?
No, he wasn't there.
Okay,
he wasn't
good.
on the call. But all these people that report to the CIO are like actively throwing him under the bus. They're like, that's a really great idea, but we'll never convince him. And he doesn't know how to convey this to the board. I'm like, wow, that's really fascinating that you're telling me this. And it's interesting how, sometimes people reach a spot of safety or maybe even just a release valve really quickly about a situation that they're dealing with internally that they need to kind of get off their chest, or they want to tell someone that because they're seeking help. Right, it ended up that we were able to then take that and really help them get on track. But at the time, it was like they're like waving the white flag, like either stay away or help us, but we don't want to stay where we're at. Like, what's that been like for you?
Oh, I mean, the closet door opens, pretty much really early in a relationship with our clients in terms of the skeletons just compiling out, And I've had a lot of situations like that where, so in our area of the business and in the app dev side, we're interacting with product teams a lot, and product teams and IT teams don't always mesh really well together. And, there's a sense of ownership from IT that, hey, I've got this governance I have to take care of. You can't just be building out apps on your own. But the product team says, you take too long to approve stuff, so I'm not going to deal with it. So just from that perspective, I mean, I get a lot of skeletons coming out of the closet. But my level of engagement with our clients is typically at the executive level. Mm-hmm. Like I'm talking to the C-suite, when we're proposing projects that we're going to do, and so they're absolutely candid about the kind of resistance that you should expect. And I need to have that information before I'm going to engage with a client. If they can't be transparent with me, and I get there and find out that these 3 departments don't want me there, and are going to be resistant, I'm already set up for failure.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. It's situations where if you get what you put into it, right?
Absolutely.
And being transparent about what you need early on. And this goes really for not just consultants, but anyone in an organization is understanding whether you're set up in a position where you can be successful. And if you're not set up in that position, being able to make changes to the position you're in so you can be in a position of success. Otherwise, you're just living a life that's sort of based on a lie.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we could circle this back to what you mentioned before, but if you can't have a level of trust with the organization, and elicit that level of trust, during the initial conversations, you're never going to get it later on.
Mm-hmm. What would you say are the best ways to help accelerate an organization that's become stagnant? One where, we run into a fair number of organizations where, the people kind of come to work every day, they do their job, they go home, they're not really excited about what they do, maybe they're not even excited about the mission of the company, but they just come to work every day just doing it. Like, what are the secrets or differentiations you've seen between companies of how you ignite that again? Like, how do you get it back?
The goal is always to get that out of the people that are there. And the way that I've found the most success is by injecting ideas that they're passionate about. And so it can be difficult because if you got a team of 50 different people, it's going to be tough to find the one thing that's going to ignite everybody and bring them together. But, for most individuals, they're looking for things that are going to make their lives easier and allow them to have more opportunity to do things that are cool, play with the cool toys. So what I found to be effective is to bring some of the cool toys and challenge them to bring something else to it, right? When we bring our interns in, here at Concurrency, I often give them a project that they want to do. Here's my project. I'm asking you to build this kegerator, mm-hmm. Or to make this enhancement to this thing, but I want you to pick something that's meaningful to you. We had one of our interns that built a Raspberry Pi device that could monitor their chicken coop at home because they were sick and tired of going out and watering the chickens all the time. So, but I made it them, right? It made it about them, and it wasn't about my solutions or my ideas.
Interesting. So you mentioned that you engage a lot with leadership, right? I think one of the things we sometimes see with IT leadership in particular is that they can sometimes feel isolated from the rest of the business and its mission. They can feel like, oh, you're just that thing over there that takes care of the PCs and the servers and stuff, and I don't really have to care about that. It's not core to my business. What have you done to coach a leader to become more relevant to the business? How do they manage up to transform or manage or engage the business?
Yeah, so I did go through this with a client of ours recently, and you know, they were looking to develop an offshore practice, and you know, their ideas, their perspective of how they would be successful was vastly different than reality. You know, in terms of their cost expectations and you know, the types of talent that they could expect to get at that value proposition. So, you know, we sat down and talked about a strategy, you know, how he could be successful at building a team out like that. And that allowed him to bring in some thought leaders, some architects that would be able to drive those teams the way that he needed them to be, which then elevated him within the organization, you know, made him more successful. By making his teams more successful, I'm able to show that he can bring value to the organization as well. And, you know, ultimately it worked.
Oh, those are great. I have two stories. So one is there was this company that I would go to, and I was doing, I don't know, some work with, I think it was System Center or something. But, and it was a time when I was just doing engineering where I kind of sit down and do something to get it done as a project. And every lunch period, they would play like LAN party games amongst this whole group. And there was probably 30 different IT people, but every lunch period they'd go and start playing LAN party games. And I wasn't really into doing that because I was just trying to get my job done.
Yeah.
And I'm like, this is the weirdest work environment ever. Like, I kind of respect that you guys are doing this and it's fun and cool and stuff, but I'm like, I'm just trying to get a project done. Like, this is kind of interesting. And then, of course, this leader, he's flying around this drone within the building as we're doing this. And I'm like, what is going on here? Like, what a crazy culture. But he, you know, on the flip side, he really got a lot of people following him as a group. They wanted to work there, and I guess they wanted to work there for a lot of reasons. But like, they wanted to be there, and he created a really interesting culture. The second one, and this is really crazy, is I was working in a company I was going there like every day for probably 6 months, and we were doing this big project. And this guy who checked me in at the you know, you bring in your badge and he like looks at your badge, or you know, beep in or whatever, and you know, he also was responsible for getting the badge and stuff. Well, anyway, this guy turned out to be a serial killer.
Like a real serial killer?
Like a real serial killer. Like, he had a dead body in, like, you said dead body, skeletons in the closet. This guy had a literal dead body in the back of his car out in the parking lot of the building I was working in. Seemingly normal guy, ultimately was arrested as a serial killer. So we had this nickname for him post-haste after this happened. We're like, this just happened to us. Like, there was a serial killer that checked us in. We knew this guy. I talked to him, and I'm still alive. So you know, as a consulting story, that's one that I think is like really positive, that I'm not dead at the moment, and that I continue to do what I'm doing.
Yeah, I feel embarrassed that I haven't had as good of a story as you. That is pretty crazy.
All right. So more on the serious side. So our last question, Brian. One of the things we love to ask, and I'd love to hear from you, is, you know, you've been in 50 customers plus, you've influenced all sorts of different really innovative directions for companies. You've helped them to navigate their roles and organizations and projects and what they should do or shouldn't do. Who's influenced you? Like, who's influenced you to be the kind of person that you are, that can effectively challenge a company in an emotionally intelligent way, in a way that allows you to be able to do so in a way that gives you the confidence to do it well? Like, who's influenced you?
Yeah, so that really is a great question. So he's going to know who he is, probably by the way I describe this. But I had a boss that I worked for, and he really empowered me to make change happen at our clients. And you know, one of the great things about him was, up until the point where he took over for the organization, for me at least, I was reporting to him. I hadn't gotten a raise in maybe 2 or 3 years. I'd been promised some, you know, but it just, you know, the organization never really did. And then when he got there, I just never asked for it. He just kept, hey, Brian, by the way, I just gave you another bump, you know, here, you know, without even asking for it. And it wasn't like it was every year. It was like I get a raise in October, and then in November he'd be like, "Hey, I'm giving you another raise," and it kind of just really made me feel appreciated, and I responded by just doing better work for him, right? And today we're still really good friends. Don't work for him anymore, but he's just a great guy.
Awesome. That is making you feel appreciated by thinking about it proactively versus like
Right.
the sort of reactive, like you bring going to him and demanding something.
Right, absolutely. I mean, it was a reward for me doing good work for him, but it was his enablement. I mean, the reward is great, right? I mean, getting recognized for that is awesome, but it was him empowering me to be my best, and always having my back if things went sour.
Awesome, man. Well, thank you for coming on the podcast.
Thanks for having me.
This is awesome. I love talking about this. I love the ideas that you're bringing to the table and the way that you're talking about how companies can be transformative and what you need to do to be an effective leader, especially as a consultant. So thank you so much for sharing your stories today.
Thanks for having me.
Awesome. And we will see you next time on the Change Agent Podcast.